Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here again. Second time in a row at the ngBigParty, so I want to thank these guys for having me here tonight as well. I work for an awesome company called Espresso, back in my hometown of Timișoara, as a technical mentor, mostly focused on UI development and user experience. And together with two of my friends, we organize Team.js, which is the local JavaScript meetup group in Timișoara. First of all, how many of you have tried out Vue.js? Oh, quite a few. Good to hear that. And how many of you have tried out React? OK, I was hoping to see that number. Great. So the creator of Vue.js calls it the progressive JavaScript framework. Now, whether it's a framework or a library or whatever it is, I won't get into that subject. But instead of progressive, I will actually call it the eclectic JavaScript framework. And this is for two reasons. First of all, because the word eclectic, I like it very much, and I try to use it as much as possible. But the second and most important reason is that, and this might come as a surprise to you, that Vue.js doesn't bring anything new, right? And doesn't bring any new concepts. Instead, it takes key concepts from different frameworks and libraries and combines them in a, let's say, sort of unique way. And I think this is a key particularity of Vue.js, and we'll see in the following moments what it's all about. Okay, so you might have heard many quotes that Vue takes the best parts from React and Angular and combines them together. While this is true, that's not the entire story. Vue.js also takes concepts from Knockout, from Ember, and even from Polymer. And remember what the guys from ngBigParty said at the beginning, that this conference is about bringing together all the frameworks, right? So, bringing them together, OK? OK, hashtag joke. Tonight, I mean, the best way I could think of talking about Vue.js is comparing it to another awesome solution, which is React. And also, I choose React to do this because, well, basically, Vue and React try to solve the same problems, actually. And yeah, I think it works out great. Well, first of all, let's start with project scaffolding. For React, we have create a React app, which if you don't want to bother with configuring Webpack and stuff, this is really great to start a new project. For Vue, we have Vue CLI, which uses a bunch of templates, official templates, which allows you to start Vue.js projects, simple ones and complex ones as well. There are two types, or two ways we can define Vue components. First of all is the Vue component method. You basically pass a name and a configuration object which contains the template, which is just declarative syntax, and the data, which acts like a view model in Knockout, or the dollar scope in Angular, or the internal state in React. This is plain JavaScript. It's great for prototypes and for building small projects, because you don't have any transpilation step required to use this. Well, in larger apps, the recommended way to define components is to use the so-called single-file components. This syntax is inspired a lot by Polymer, and what this is actually some files with the Vue extension that contains three parts. The first part is the template, which is the actual markup of the component. The second part is the script, which is the behavior, the logic of the component, of course, which contains JavaScript code. And the style, where you can define the CSS and the presentation part. So you have all these three ingredients bundled up together into a single file, which is, I find it very, very interesting and very, very nice. Of course, you need a compiler or a compile step in order to make this work. You can use Webpack or Browserify. And since you run a compile step, you can use whatever template engine you want. So you can replace this HTML here with Jade, which, by the way, renamed to Pug recently because of copyright issues, or Handlebars, for example. And if you want to include external files, you can do that as well for CSS and JavaScript, which is really awesome. Let's talk about conditionals for a second. In React, you don't have any special syntax to define conditionals or to display a part of markup based on some condition. So you use actual JavaScript code to do that. Vue.js uses a template engine which has a declarative syntax similar to Ember or Angular. And well, there are two different approaches to this problem. Now, one problem that I find with React when doing this is because most of the times you often lead up doing something like this. So you define the conditional markup outside the JSX syntax, and then you interpolate it inside. So this leads to a lot of indirection from my perspective. The same happens with loops and iterations. So when you iterate over collections, you use the JavaScript methods in order to do that. Now, I don't know how many of you have written PHP code. Quite a lot. Okay, I have written a lot of PHP code myself. And when I first saw this and actually wrote loops in JSX, I felt like going back like 10 years or 12 years in the past. And when writing PHP code, you did something similar. Like you combined the markup and the logic in the same file, in the same portion of code. And I did this quite a lot in the past. And one day, a colleague of mine came to me and said, hey man, you can use template engines, to separate the logic and the markup. And that's the main reason why template engines were built, because in order to make this separation. And that's probably the main reason why I don't really like JSX and why I really enjoy the declarative syntax of templates. Regarding data binding, React only supports one-way data binding. Now, usually, from my own experience, you would collect a lot of information from the user, right? You have an input, and every time a user types in something in the input, you want to collect that information and update the state. So in React, we do something like this: set the initial value, then listen to the onChange event, and call one of your, I don't know, internal methods, which updates the state of the component, right? You can do the same thing in Vue. It's almost the same thing. I won't go over the details. But Vue also supports two-way data binding, just like Angular 2 or Simple Angular, which has implemented both types of data binding. And you can write one-liner in order to make this, so this is the same as the previous code. Only one line of code. Okay, let's talk about props. Now, probably if you've written React applications, you know that props are data that gets passed to the component from its parent, right? The same principles apply to Vue.js as well. In React, they are optional. You don't need to explicitly define the props. In Vue, it is required to define the props because Vue adds some getters and setters in order to make this data reactive. We also have props validation. In React, it's a bit cumbersome to write this validation. You have two different attributes. You have the prop types, where you define the type of the props, and you have the default props, which allows you to set some default values. In Vue.js, since you have to define the props, you can do the validation and the default values here as well, which makes the code a bit concise. Regarding components communication, let's say you have a parent and a child. The parent-to-child communication, so the top to bottom, it's pretty easy. It's done by props. But if something happens in the child component and wants to trigger an update to the parent component, that's a bit tricky. I mean, it's not trivial to do. In React, what you need to do is to pass the handler. So the parent passes the handler to the child, and the child executes the handler when the required event happens. In Vue, this happens the other way around. Every Vue component is actually an event emitter, just like the event emitter in Node.js, like a pub/sub design pattern, okay? And every component can emit events and can listen to events emitted from the children. So in Vue's case, the child component can emit events, and the parent can subscribe to certain events and to execute the event handlers that are required. Now, when we have deeply nested components, this gets a bit tricky in both situations, right? In React, probably you've done this a lot. If you need to pass down an event handler to a deeply nested component, you have to pass down the handler from component to component to component until it reaches the deep down child. In Vue, you have to do the same thing, but the other way around. Like you have to bubble up the event all the way up to the parent component that needs to make the change. But Vue has another interesting approach, or let's say a hack or a workaround for this. As I said, every Vue component is an event emitter. So we can, let's say, instantiate an empty Vue component, which acts like an event bus, like a global event bus. And then we can emit events from any component in our application, and any other component can listen to those events directly on the event bus. So it's really easy to make the communication between two arbitrary components in our component tree. About state management, of course, in the case of React, you probably would use Redux together with React Redux. But you can also use MobX, which kind of has different approaches. Compared to Redux, MobX doesn't use immutable data. It uses mutable data structures. In the case of Vue, you can also use Redux together with Review. Review is the glue between Redux and Vue. But the recommended solution is to use Vux, the so-called Vux library, which is a state management library dedicated for Vue applications. Now we'll make a short comparison between Redux and Vux. In the case of Redux, you're not allowed to do any state change outside the store, right? This is completely forbidden. In Vux, this is optional. By default, you are allowed to do any state changes outside the Vux store. You only get some warnings in the console, but you can flip on a flag, a simple flag, and it acts basically just like Redux. So no state change outside the store. Redux is strictly immutable. You always have to return new references from your reducers. In Vux, you use mutable state, which I don't know if it's better or worse, but it blends better within the JavaScript language from my point of view. Because Redux is a standalone library, you need some additional integration in order to make it work with a React application or a Vue application. That's why you have these libraries that make the glue between the Redux and the framework that you use. Vue, on the other hand, is not standalone. You can only use it with Vue applications, meaning that it's better integrated because it already knows that it works inside the Vue application, so there is less boilerplate needed. About unit testing, I don't know if you have used React on test utils. I did for a few minutes, and it's horrible. Probably that's why everyone is using Enzyme, which is really awesome. And when using React, I also heard about Jest, I don't know how it's pronounced, and I'm really sad that we don't have to talk about Jest anymore. But Jest is really awesome. I like it for three main reasons. First of all, it runs tests in parallel, just like the Ava framework. Second of all, it runs tests on Node.js, which is really fast. You don't have to rely on a browser in order to make your tests run. And the third and most important reason is that finally there is a framework that has code coverage integrated into the framework. So you don't have to install the code coverage or Istanbul or whatever you want to use for code coverage and then configure it in order to make it work. Just flip on a flag and everything works out of the box, so really great. Hats off to Jest. Now, in the case of Vue, the out-of-the-box experience regarding unit testing is decent, let's say decent, almost as Enzyme. The tricky part is that currently, there is no trivial way to run the tests on Node. You have to rely on a browser using Karma. But this is just yet, because we have promises from the creator of Vue.js that this year he will release a Vue CLI template which will have unit tests run on Node.js as well. Because technically it can be done. I don't know exactly why currently there isn't any official solution or official recommendation for this. Okay, regarding performance. If performance matters, in the case of React, you have to use, or you have to implement the internal method should_component_update in order to, I'll get into this a bit later, why you need to do this. But probably if you use React, probably you need, you know about this and why you should use it. Vue.js, on the other hand, is optimized out of the box. You don't need to do manual optimizations. And in order to understand why you don't need to do this, I have to talk very briefly about change detection in different frameworks. So in Angular, we have the dirty checking mechanisms, which, in short, when something changes in your application, Angular knows that something changed, but doesn't exactly know why. So it has to iterate, yeah. It has to iterate through all the properties, all the watches, and all the stuff to figure out what changed in the application in order to make the UI updates. Now, this process, probably you understand that for each small update, you need to iterate through everything. And it takes time. It's really slow. So Knockout and Ember implemented dependency tracking, which is a different mechanism. They used observables in order to track the changes. And when something changes in your application, it actually knows what changed and doesn't need to iterate through every stuff in the application because they already know what's changed. Now, the drawback of this approach is that it has longer initialization times because all these observables are some functions that needs to be called when the application is bootstrapped. So the initialization times are actually a bit longer in the case of Knockout and Ember. React, on the other hand, implements virtual DOM. Basically, it's a virtual representation of your component structure, right? And when something changes in the application, a new virtual DOM is created, and React basically makes the diff, the difference between the two trees, and figures out what changed and to make the updates. Now, in larger applications, the update time or the re-render time is basically depends on the time it needs to recompute the second virtual DOM tree. And that's why you need to implement should_component_update in order for it to skip some parts of the tree in order to make it faster. Now, as I said, Vue is eclectic, right? Remember? And it implements virtual DOM plus dependency tracking. So because it uses dependency tracking together with virtual DOM, it knows what needs to be changed, and you don't need to implement that method anymore, should_component_update or a similar method like that. And I have two videos here that go into more detail about this. Now there is this benchmark, really comprehensive benchmark, which places Vue very high. Only Inferno outperforms it. You don't have to trust it literally, but you should always perform your own optimization testing before trusting these online benchmarks. And also there is this article from Football Radar, which did a migration from React to Vue, and they got a huge performance boost. And it's really interesting to read the article and their story because it's really interesting. I would say just that. Okay, some conclusions, my own conclusions, after working both with React and Vue. In React, I feel like you are pushed to write only JavaScript code for the logic, for the markup, and even for CSS. It's kind of, I don't know, the community way of doing things in React. Vue, on the other hand, gives credit to these three different languages. So if you like to write purely CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, probably you would like Vue as well. On the other hand, React is very simple. It's very simple concepts. It's lower level, and there is no magic behind React. And I really like about React. But on the other hand, you require extra boilerplate in order to get things done because of this no magic happening, right? And you have to write these manual optimizations if performance does matter. Vue.js has a bigger API, much bigger API than React, and it has some magic behind in regard to the reactive properties you need to understand, and some other things as well. But the magic is really a good magic. Like, I mean, if you understand the small magic that it does, it feels really good because it saves you from a lot of extra work. And you get optimization out of the box for this. Also, React promotes functional programming and immutable data structures. I mean, immutable data structures is not promoted by React, but by Redux. And don't get me wrong, I really understand the key benefits of functional programming and immutable data structures. But I think that, I get the feeling that the implementations in JavaScript, because JavaScript wasn't built with immutable data structures in mind, it's like scratching your left ear with the right arm. It doesn't feel natural to do this. That's why you get some solutions like Immutable.js, which, I don't know if you used it, but it adds a lot of extra boilerplate and a lot of overhead to your applications. Vue, on the other hand, is reactive and uses mutable data. And from my point of view, it uses JavaScript the way it was built, and you get a lot of great performance right out of the box because of this. So there are, as I said, reactive properties are really simple, some getters and setters that are added to the properties, and it just works. I don't know what else to say. Some things that, well, first of all, Vue.js is like a new kid on the block, comparing it to React and Angular, for example. But it's not that small anymore. I mean, Laravel, I don't know if you heard of Laravel, it's a PHP framework, let's say popular PHP framework, includes by default in their package.json Vue and Vue resource. So Vue is their recommendation for a front-end JavaScript framework. Also, WebStorm just added, like a few days ago, added support for Vue.js, which is really awesome. And there is VueConf this year in June in Poland. So I'm really looking forward to see what the future brings. Dzięki wam všem, everybody. Thank you.